Thank you, Stan. My question is to the Assistant Minister for the Republic. With inflation at an all-time high, an increasingly contested Indo-Pacific and a cost of living crisis like no other, why is the government using taxpayers' money to fund a national listening tour on the Republic, insisting on a further expensive referendum and prosecuting a change to a system that is working so well?
Thanks for the question. No doubt the government's priority is easing cost of living pressure for Australians, and all of the policies that we've been focusing on and releasing have been aimed at easing that cost of living pressure. But in terms of the government's longer term vision for our nation, it involves a discussion with the Australian people about, importantly, recognising First Nations Australians in our Constitution. That deep historical, cultural and spiritual connection.
The question here, though, was about the Republic, which you're also overseeing. Why would you be beginning that process when there's already a process underway, as Teela pointed out, for First Nations voice?
Because we have a longer-term vision for Australia. This year will be about the voice, recognising First Nations people in our Constitution and delivering a voice to Parliament. But over the longer term, we see Australia as a mature, independent nation, making its own way in the world, reflecting our true multiculturalism, our unique culture and identity by having one of our own as our head of state in the future. And the current system that we have is the complete antithesis of our democracy. We woke up in September last year when the Queen passed away, and all of a sudden we had a new head of state. The Australian people weren't consulted about that. The Australian people didn't get a choice in who should be their head of state, despite the fact that we govern by democratic means. So we believe it's the right time to begin a discussion with the Australian people. We're going to let the voice have its space this year, and we'll focus on that. But at the same time, I'm working with multicultural communities in particular, with younger Australians, to hear their views about the Republic, whether or not they believe it's something that we should pursue and how we can do it into the future.
One of the concerns that Alessandro had was the money that's being spent. How much is this costing?
It's costing next to nothing. So,
which is what?
I'm the assistant.
In political terms, next to nothing could mean anything.
Nothing, because I'm the Assistant Minister for Defence and Veterans Affairs as well. I don't get any additional staff for the work that I have on the Republic. And the consultations that I'm doing around the country, I'm usually tacking on to my work as the Assistant Minister for Defence and Veterans Affairs. So my work is costing the taxpayer very little, but we are beginning that conversation with the Australian people about our future and about recognising our independence and our maturity as a nation in the future.
I'm not Australian. I come from England/Ireland. So I find this conversation really interesting, looking at Australia, what's happening here and how you're trying to forge a new identity. And these are similar, some of the conversations we've been having in England, for instance, about the role of monarchy and what the royal family stands for, and how do you actually deal with the history of colonialism and how do we come to terms with it and acknowledge the past and actually talk about it in an honest and open way, whether we need the monarchy or not, what is it for, what is it doing for us. And I think it's really good that you're having this conversation around trying to forge an identity which reconciles with the past, with the colonialism, and moves forward dealing with the monarchy and its role in Australia today.
And the Irish they were Irish Twitter and blackfellow Twitter were very alike when...
Oh, it was fascinating.
Yes, it was very fascinating. But I think there's a bigger conversation here, Stan, in terms of process and referendums. And I can see, on the one hand, what the government are trying to do, given that we're a nation that doesn't necessarily like change. We're a nation that's a bit stuck in the ice ages.
Referendums are particularly hard to pass.
And referendums in particular are very difficult. I think actually we should see this as a potential investment in our democracy. Ireland, for example, have an entire infrastructure around referendum processes. In Barbados, they just become republic, but their model was to have a prime minister and a president. I think these are actually really important investments in our bigger picture
I
of who
think
we
change
are.
is always uncomfortable because our brains don't want to acknowledge change and accept change.
Well, Alexandra, I think one of the main points here is that referendums are very difficult to pass. The one on the
Because
table...
politicians make it difficult.
So, at the moment, there's one on the table. Matt is flagging another one in a future term. One of the reasons I'm a supporter of the voice concept is...
And a republic, is that right?
Well, but I don't think it's a priority right now.
But you do support the
I'm
idea of
quite
Australia becoming a
open-minded
republic.
about it. But the point I was going to make is one of the reasons I think the voice is such a good idea is because I think the country needs new institutions. I don't think that the country needs new institutions in relation to our overall governance. But I think there's a very strong case for the voice to help close the gap and do a whole lot of other things.
We are going to explore the
Yeah.
voice. But Alessandro's got his hand up. You want to...
I find it, I guess, a bit perplexing, the assertion that to become a mature nation or to be a mature nation that we have to become a republic, or that it's somehow less Australian to be a constitutional monarchy. I guarantee if you went out there to like the everyday Australian and said, will you feel more Australian if we made a politician president? I can guarantee you a majority of people would probably say no. Indeed, on Anzac Day, perhaps one of our most important national days, if you went up to our veterans who have sworn allegiance to the reigning monarch of the day and said, do you feel less Australian because you've sworn allegiance to the King or Queen today on Anzac Day? I guarantee you most of them would turn around and say, well, look at the flag that's on my left-hand shoulder. It's the Australian flag. I'm very proud to be Australian, and becoming a republic isn't going to make us more Australian.
How do people in the room feel about that? If you want to put your hands up, and Alessandro is saying he doesn't think that most people would say yes, they want to do that. How do you feel about a republic now? Hands up? In favour? And against? Yeah. No. Pro-republic. OK, now it goes up. Yeah.
But can I say something?
I'll come to Pragya in a minute, but go to... Where is England right now?
Well, I'm very touched by everybody's faith in referendums. We've had a referendum in Britain which has been the biggest political disaster of my lifetime.
Yes.
And
Brexit.
we're very, very bad at referendum. And, we're poorer, we're more bitter, we're more divided, we're angrier, we're unhappier, and we're much, much poorer. And that is a result of a decision taken in a referendum. I, myself, believe it or not, have faith in the process of democratic politics. And I'd like to see people leading for exactly the ideas you're talking about. I'd like to see them elected, and I'd like to see them leading the conversation. Because I don't trust the referendum after our very, very bitter experience of a referendum in England, which now, I may say, and I'm not speaking personally for one side or another, most of the public now regret. It's just statistical that something like 60 to 65% of people feel that the Brexit vote was a mistake, which it, clearly was.
Yeah, I think Brexit, I was going to say the same thing. The Brexit was a disaster, and it was the people voting for it. But it depends whether the people are really informed about what the situation is and how it's going to impact their lives or not. I don't think that was the case then, that they really knew the consequences. And I don't believe that it's the case here, that the common Australians or people know what that would have the impact on their lives or not. So I think that is a broader conversation to have before you go forward with something.
And we just hold the point, because we are going to come back to questions of referendum. But Alessandro, thank you for that.